Okay. Shabar and all the other leads, how was homework and group studies this week?
Any leads able to speak? I don't think Shabar is in here, but Redwan is there.
Yes. Can I go first?
Sure.
Yeah, so Team Hazard, we had two group studies this week, and we went over the every requirement, each one of them, and then some students, they had questions and we answered their questions.
Okay. So what was the level of understanding when it comes to requirement phase?
Excuse me?
Does your teammates understand requirement phase, what to do when we're in requirement phase?
Yeah, they do. We asked questions and we asked them how many scenarios they can come up with each of the requirements, and we had it done there.
All right, sounds good. So I'll just talk about it for another minute and then we'll move on. So guys, so in the requirement phase, when we're in the requirement phase, we need to make sure that we understand the requirement. Not only understand, we need to make sure that the requirement is testable. And what I mean by that, if a requirement is not testable, you cannot really test. Just by understanding it is not good enough. We need to make sure a few things. For example, a requirement must be unique. We cannot have duplicate requirements, then it don't work, right? If you have multiple similar or same type of requirement, then there will be an issue. That's one thing. So requirement has to be unique. It has to be bounded. So for example, I don't know if we talked about it, if your requirement is not bounded, then you cannot really test it. So for example, if there is, this is just a simple example. If you have a username and a password field and it's not defined properly, if it's not bounded, then you can't test it, right? For example, if you have password field and they just say you should have a password field, and they do not give you more clarity on that, then you cannot test it. A password field can be anything, right? So when it comes to password or username field, they need to make sure that let you know what are the type of characters allowed by that input box. What are the digits? What are the limitations? Special characters, and whatnot. Everything has to be defined, otherwise you cannot test it. What else? A requirement must be testable, unique, bounded, and not ambiguous. It should not be confusing. So things like that. It's a very important phase. That's where everything starts from. So we need to make sure that we spend enough time understanding that requirement. Multiple calls happens during that phase with stakeholders, business analysts, and the team. You have calls with business analysts to go over the business logic, to go over understanding the requirement and everything. You would have more calls with developers to understand their point of view, what they're thinking about this requirement and how to handle it, things like that. Just by reading is not enough. We'll have team calls. If we're working agile, there will be requirement sprint planning call, obviously. That's where you talked about those kind of things. I hope that's clear. So we're going to move on from this phase to next phase, which is test plan phase. And in test plan phase, creating test plan, this is equally important, creating test plan. So in agile world, creating test plan is not as important, but generally, and in waterfall world, test plan was a huge deal. It's a big deal. We'll go over it. And when it comes to agile, it's very hard to do test planning. A physical test plan, right? Physical test plan, writing the document, circulating the document and everything is very hard. It's very hard to do and maintain because you only have 2 weeks of sprint. But when it comes to waterfall, test plan was a big deal. But regardless, for your interview purpose, you need to learn it, and we'll go over it. A lot of time they ask you in the interviews about the test plan, and we just need to make sure that we understand it. So we'll go over it in a second. Any questions before we start with the test plan? Okay. So let's go over test plan. So a test plan is a detailed document that explains how the entire testing will be done. A typical test plan. So the reason we'll go over it in details, it's because of the interview purpose. When they ask you about test plan in the interview, you need to make sure that you spend enough time explaining test plan. As a tester, you must know test plan, and you're the one who should be creating the test plan. Never say that my lead created test plan and I didn't. Don't say that. Make sure you tell them that you're very comfortable creating a test plan, and then you explain. And this is what you should say basically when it comes to explaining test plan. A test plan is a detailed document that explains how the entire testing will be done. Typically, a test plan has cover page, table of contents, introduction, purpose, scope, test approach, test entry criteria, test exit criteria, test acceptance criteria, test deliverables, test schedule, roles and responsibilities, test environment, acronyms, risk assessments, etc. So these are the standard. This would be a standard way of creating test plan, but like I always say, it does not have to be 100% with these materials. Your company may have a different template, and usually when you're working in a company, they usually have a test plan template for themselves, and that could be somewhat similar. It does not have to be 100% match of what we are talking about here. But if you can understand this, you'd understand any test plan. If you go into a company who does not have a test plan template, you can always find a test plan template in Google, and you can just grab it and make changes according to your company. So we'll look into a couple of test plans, and then we'll go over more in depth with how to create a test plan. At any point, feel free to raise your hand, ask questions if you don't understand anything or something. Okay. All right, so this is a test plan that we created some point for IT solutions, and this is the cover page. So usually its cover page has test plan name, project name, version number, and release number, and probably created by. That's what usually a cover page has. And a couple of things important here: version number and release number. So version number is version of the document release number is the release of the application that you're working on. So usually each application that you work on has a release number. Release is nothing but a build, and we'll talk about build. Release. Well, it depends, right? In waterfall world, it was different. We would have a deployment not very frequently. A release will happen in every 3 months or 6 months and whatnot. In agile world, we have a release in 2 weeks. So a test plan, when we are creating test plan, we need to make sure which release we are creating this test plan for. And usually in your company, they'll have a release number in place. And a release number will be something like this, right? When it starts, it would be 0.1 whatever, or 1.0 point something, right? And if a release is a minor release, then this number will increase. If it's a medium release, then this number will increase. And if it's a major release, then this number will change. So this stuff you don't need to understand now, but I'm just explaining to you. So when I say major or minor release, I can explain to you a little bit. So this is an application, right? When an application is being built, they will grab multiple components at once and release a part of application. Now, let's say 2 weeks from now, we are building just the login page of that application. So usually login page is a big deal. But along with the login page, if there are like multiple major functionalities are being released, for example, homepage and flights, then that would be a major release. And in that scenario, our release number, this number will change. This number will increase. This 4 will become 5, and then the rest will probably stay the same. But if we're changing something very simple, or a few functionalities are much simpler than that, which would be considered as a minor release, then each time they make those changes, this number will change. If something from your application, let's say a medium functionality is being released, then this number will change. In the most cases, like what we frequently see, like this number is changing each time they're releasing something new. So that number will change, and it will continue to increase. So this is releases tied to the applications. All right, let me know if you have any questions on that. Now, comes to the version number. So version is entirely tied to this document that you're working on, whatever it is, whether it's test plan or something else. Now here, you created a document, and obviously this is not a personal document. This document will be circulated to your team along with the entire team that you're working with. So that would be developers, business, projects, and other folks within your team. So when you create a test plan, you will finalize it and you will send it across, and everybody will look into it. There will be people signing off on that document and whatnot, and there will be, when I say signing off, approving it, making sure that that document is standard and that document is acceptable, and others will be following that document, and others will be reading that document. So this document will be circulated, right? And this version of the document, everyone will have access to it. Now, let's say 2 days from now or a week from now, we need to make some changes. So usually when you share this document would be in a share folder or in a location where everybody has access to those folders or the document. Back in the days, people would send an email to everybody saying, hey, this is the test plan for this release. Please look into it, review it, and whatnot. Let us know if you have any suggestions. So that was the way before. But now, like, I can show you an example. So this is a Confluence page or a shared location where everybody has access. Not everybody, like those who are working within the team, they'll have access to it, and you can give access to others as well. So this is where everybody has their own space. This is my space or our space, quality assurance. This is our space. This is my actual project. So similarly, everybody has their own folders. Now, what I would do, right? So what I would do, I'll just go into my location and so this is where my test plan is. A big user stories, non-functional requirement, test plan right here. So this is where my test plan is. This is my location. What happened? Something changed. Give me 1 second, please. We should have a test plan, yeah. Okay, so this is where my test plan is, and I could just simply take this location and share here or share it to anyone in any of the communication platform, whether if it's Microsoft Teams, Slack, or even I could just take this and email it to the group saying, hey, this is where test plan is, feel free to look into it. Usually we don't email anymore, we just use Slack or anything else. Or I can just mention them here, FYI, here, and they would be notified. Or I could just share from here. So many different ways we could do that, but just showing you how it works in real project. All right, so okay, cool. So okay, so now you have created the test plan and you shared it. Now, if you are making any changes to that document, you will change the version number. And same thing, if you're making small changes, this number will increase. If you're making major changes, this number will change. And so that way people can differentiate, okay, this version is prior version, we should look into the new version, the updated version. So that's what this is for. Moving on. This is table of contents, and this is where you know you find where everything's are for this test plan. And everybody, I'm sure all of you know that. So then your introduction, in introduction, it talks about the purpose of this document, project overview, project objective, and whatnot. Okay. Scope of testing. So this is very, very important. This page, it talks about what's in the scope and what's not in the scope. Test entry and exit criteria. So when you enter, we'll talk about it more in details. This talks about like how to enter your testing and how to exit out of your testing. Entry and exit criteria. Okay. I think we had entry, exit, and test schedule. This is test schedule. Test approach. You also have test approach here. Test deliverables and artifacts. Roles and responsibilities. Test tools and test environments. All right, let me move on to better template. So this is a test template that we created, which is not very good, not very presentable. But let's look into this one. Test plan. This is a test plan for my actual project. Let me download it so we can. Okay, so let's quickly go over this one. Test plan for Zephyr digital product. So this is the product name. So this has a document story prepared by, reviewed by, approved by, and the version. That's what we talked about, initial version and the date. So this is 1.0 initial version of that document. And let's go. And the table of contents has all the details. Now here, like I was saying, introduction, then this is just standard template. You can just talk a little bit about the document, talk a little bit about the project. Guys, feel free to ask questions. You have to create a test plan next week. So understanding a test plan is very important. So first part is about the document and then the project details, project objectives, test objective, primary test objective. These are nothing but standard a few lines that you can talk about and then make some changes to your application accordingly. So this is where things gets very, very interesting. And that's where you need to start thinking about your project, actual project. Scope of testing. Now here you're talking about what's in scope and what's not in scope. And to understand this part, you need to understand STLC more in depth. Sorry, anyone has any questions? Okay, so moving on. So in scope, so there are different type of testing. So understanding this, like you have probably 15, 20 different types of testing. Now, what type of testing will you perform? What type of testing is in scope and what type of testing is not in scope? That's what needs to be mentioned here, right? So we have testing types: smoke testing, sanity testing, end-to-end testing, and much more. We have functional testing, regression testing, cross-browser testing, database testing, unit testing. So these are the different type of testing must be included as part of this release or this test plan. So it talks a little bit about all of them and which environment. So we'll talk about environment and who is responsible for those testing. That needs to go in here in scope testing. So this is standard, right? You must perform smoke testing and sanity and end-to-end whatnot. And this is something must be internally you and your QA lead and project or other manager. They need to be on in the same page and agreed upon before we put it here, because there are so many type of testing. You need to understand what is included and what is not. And that has to be in this document and needs to be shared and approved. Otherwise, later there will be problem. And I'll show you why as we go down in this document, right? This were in scope. Now you have load, stress, and endurance. So these are non-functional testing. I don't want to go more details into this stuff. Okay, so this is out of testing. Someone has a question.
Yes, bye. So all these documents has to be created by us, the QA, or the lead's gonna do it. I'm a little bit confused on that.
No, let's not say lead creates this document. I know there are people encourage this kind of stuff, but I don't. This is a very simple document, and when you're in an interview saying I didn't create this document, my lead created this document, that's a negative thing that you were saying, because when someone is giving you a job as a QA, I'm expecting, like, as a QA, you should know how to create a test plan. So I do not encourage anyone saying that my lead created a test plan and I didn't, or I was just part of it. Don't say that. We spend a lot of time explaining test plan. We practice creating test plan. We talk about test plan a lot, and we have good documents about test plan. So when you're facing interview, and this is when you go to an actual work, chances are you'll never create a test plan. And even if you have to create a test plan, you can ask them for the template. If they don't have a template, just grab something from Google and you're fine. But this is more for the interview. When you're in the interview, say you create a test plan, you're very, very comfortable creating test plan. Never say my lead created and I don't know, or I was not part of it. So don't say that.
Okay, one more question, sorry. So when we, let's say we have to create and we do create it, does it has to be in the order that you're showing us, or it could be different format, could be different?
No, it could be any format. Usually you should use Microsoft Word. I have seen test plan in PPT format, but I would not encourage it. Microsoft Word is good, but when it comes to materials within the test plan, does not have to be exactly what I'm showing you, but this is the standard. And I try to cover everything that it requires for a test plan.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So out of scope, right? So you have in scope of testing and out of scope of testing. So you need to know what's not in scope of testing. So for example, my release or my application, we decided that we will not support or test a mobile version of that application. We will not worry about it. So that needs to be included here, and this needs to be shared, and everybody needs to see this. So later on, like, you know, if there's an issue or confusion, and if someone asks, let's say client says, hey, the application doesn't work in mobile. So we can say, hey, this was not tested in mobile and test plan is there. Feel free to look into it. So you're safe. All right. Now, roles and responsibilities. Obviously, this is where you talk about the entire team. Yes, brother. Yeah, you have a question.
So in the scope, can you go up? Can you go up the scope? So if anything you cannot do, you have to out of scope. You have to write in out of scope, like they said in the mobile testing. Whatever you don't do, you have to write it here.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, that's the question.
Yeah. So most cases you will see. You're welcome, brother. Most cases you will see non-functional testing is in outer scope or mobile testing or a few other. Usually you will see non-functional testing like this: load testing, stress testing, volume, and whatnot. So depending on the type of application, depending on what is being asked by the client, you will be able to define your in scope and out of scope.
Okay.
So
Thank
do
you.
not, you're welcome, brother. Let's not stress about it right now. As we go further into this, you'll understand this clearly.
Okay.
And this is important here, like roles and responsibilities. This is where you talk about different roles within this this project, right? Starting with the product manager, QA lead, QA engineers, then tech leads. So titles would vary depending on the company and the organization. Every company has different titles and whatnot, but this is kind of standard, right? This might be like, you know, dev lead or dev managers. TPO stands for technical product owner, Scrum master. So this table is talking about the roles and the individuals and the responsibilities. Right. Now moving into test entry criteria. So this is where you define your test entry criteria and what is entry and exit criteria. The entry and exit criteria have been defined below. Okay. So entry criteria, before you enter testing, you need to, whatever the stuff you need to mention here. And this is very, very important. And this will be your interview questions as well, right? What is test entry and what is test exit criteria? So as part of your entry criteria, you need to make sure all planned tickets or JIRAs must be fixed, unit tested, and delivered in QA, right? So, I mean, most of you probably understand what this line means. Some of you probably don't, but we'll talk about it. The test environment must be in place and ready for system test. Required test plan and test data created. Smoke test checklist should have major functionality working. So if you're new, this might be a little bit technical. And if I explain this to you now, it probably won't make sense. So we need to understand more, a little bit more for the new folks, then we can talk more about it. So, but let me give you a little bit brief. So all planned JIRAs must be fixed. So JIRAs are nothing but tickets, right? So tickets when test entry criteria. So requirements are written in JIRA form. If you're working Agile, you guys know we talked about story and epics. So before you enter your testing, they need to have these tickets implemented first for you to go test it. If those tickets are not implemented, then you cannot go test it. And unit testing, this is a type of testing that is done by developers. Developers to understand, so we have 10, 20 type of testings. There is no limit. There are so many different type of testing. We'll talk about those when we get there. But just understand there are two type of testing is usually done by the developers. One is unit and another one is integration testing. But the unit testing, this is something must be done by the developers. And so before you test your stuff, developers has to test, perform this unit testing. And unit testing is nothing but testing the code itself. When they write their code, they need to make sure that code is written properly, following the proper standard, and it's doing its job. So they perform this high-level testing, and they need to complete it before you enter your testing. So this is what this line is. Second line, test environment must be in place. Now, we'll talk about test environment more in details. So understand, when you are QA, you will have a place where you'll be performing your testing, right? So that particular place is nothing but your environment. So every team has their own environment. Developers will have their own environment. They'll be working in their own environment. You won't work there. Once they're done with their job, their work, they will send that application to your environment. You'll have an isolated environment where you only work. Nobody touches your environment. So that's nothing but QA environment. So there will be another environment, which is UAT, and we talked about it before. And then there will be another environment, production environment. So there are 4 type of environment that those are standards, but different company could have different number of environment. Usually you will see 4, 5, 6 environments, or even 3, depending on your company. The companies are moving toward having less number of environments because each environment costs money. And now that everyone is moving toward AWS, so additional environment adds more licenses and cost. So people are trying to reduce that and trying to have less and less number of environments. So, but in any case, you need to have at least 3 to 4 environments. Dev has to have 1 environment. Dev and QA should not be working in 1 environment. Although I have seen some companies there having dev and QA working in the same environment, but that is maybe not even 1 to 2%, and it's not recommended. So if dev and QA work in 1 environment, so let's say dev finish work of a particular functionality, now they tell QA, hey, this is done, go ahead and test it. While you're testing, they'll be working on something else, and chances are they may break what they have fixed for you before. So that doesn't make sense, right? So you'll be doing a lot of repetitive work, and that's not recommended. So QA must have their own environment. UAT environment is where training happens, and UAT folks have access and they do their verification there. And we talked about UAT before, right? User acceptance testing, and that's where client brings their own testers to do their testing. In a production environment, that's the 4th one, and that's the most important one. When an application is sent to production, that's where everybody has access to it. Prior to production, other than that IT company or that team, no one has access. Once that moves to production, that's where everybody has access to it. If that application is public, so let's say Facebook, right, is public, everybody has access to it everywhere from every part of the world. Now when that application is being built internally in development environment, other than those folks, no one has access. When it's in QA environment, we have access to it. When it's in UAT, just the team has access to it. When it moves to production, that's where everybody has access to it, right? So here we're talking about before we enter testing, as part of test entry criteria, we must have our test environment in place and it's ready for testing. That's what we're saying. Required test plan and test data created. So test plan is the document we are working on right now. That needs to be in place before you enter your testing, and test data. So test data for some cases, like, you need to have test data in place before you start testing. For example, right, if an application has a login functionality and you need to test with a valid login scenario, you need to have those test data created and in place before. If you have, let's say, payment system, you're verifying, you need to have those credit card information and whatnot in place. But that's just 2 simple examples. There are so many different type of test data and things in those nature, and you'll understand those when you have an actual project, and depending on your project needs, you will create test data. So that needs to be in place. Smoke testing checklist should have major functionality working. So after all of this, right, you need to make sure that when application is given to you and saying, hey, go ahead and test it, there's a standard in the industry that when an application given, that needs to meet that standard. So standard meaning when developers are giving you this application, some cases this application might be in stable condition, and some cases it's not stable condition. What I mean by that, right? If they give you this application, if this application doesn't even load, how would you test that application? And do not be surprised, it happens a lot. Developers finish their coding and their thing is ready and everything is good, but when it comes to us QA folks testing it, nothing works. It doesn't even load. If you have a login functionality, it doesn't even allow you to log in and whatnot. So those kind of things has to be in place, those checks and balances in place before you start testing, right? That's one thing. The other thing is, right, before you start testing, you need to make sure that your testers are in place, you have a computer, you have a internet connection, you have all the required documentation in place, things like that. So these are your part of test entry criteria. Now, I hope this is clear. Moving into test exit criteria. Once testing is done, now we need to make sure that you're meeting test exit criteria before you move out of testing. So you go into testing and you could test there your whole life, but you need a time frame, a point where you can say, hey, this is working fine. Testing is done. I'm moving on from this one. Now it's tricky. It's very hard to do, right? When it comes to software, you can always do more stuff to make sure that application is good. As a tester, you will be never satisfied, and you cannot be, and you'll see that when you're in that environment. You always feel like we could do more. But there has to be a standard that you need to follow before you exit out of your testing, and that would be an interview question. They will ask you, like, how do you exit out of your testing? How do you know when to exit out of your testing? So there are criteria that needs to be met. So first one, all test cases based on JIRA should be executed. So test cases. For the new folks, right, test cases are something that you would be creating after today's class. We will be going over test cases. So test cases are nothing but step-by-step process of testing a requirement. So you'll be creating hundreds of test cases for a particular release. So we need to make sure those test cases has been executed. Those test cases has been run. So that's one of exit criteria. Any exception deferred JIRA item should be signed up. So when you're executing test cases, you'll be finding bugs, and some bugs will be high priority, some bugs will be low priority. So in the scenario where you find low priority bugs, and so when you find the bugs, not all the bugs will be fixed. So that's something we need to understand. So not all the bugs will be fixed. Some of the bugs will be there open, and we need to make sure we bring it up to the team and the managers and the client, letting them know, hey, these bugs are there. And if they're not fixing it, they need to sign off on those. They need to make sure they're moving on with this release, knowing that we have known bugs. So that's our job as a tester. Then the third bullet point is talking about all high and critical priority defects. Part of this release has been retested and closed. So we talked about low priority bug. What about the high priority bugs? So those high priority bugs that you find, that needs to be fixed by the developers, and that needs to be retested by us QAs. So that needs to be done. All the regression testing is complete. So we test, right? We test for multiple days, depending on what environment you're working on. If it's agile, we're talking about days. If it's waterfall, we're talking about weeks. So, but at the end of it, right, we need to retest or do an end-to-end flow. So end-to-end flow from beginning to ending. So we're talking about very last day or very last minutes. We need to rerun those test cases. We need to do an end-to-end flow. So we'll talk about this in more details later, especially for the new folks. What is regression test? We'll talk about those later. So as part of exit criteria, we need to make sure that we are performing regression testing at the very end. All the regression testing of the impacted areas for retested defects should be complete. So when you find bugs, we need to make sure that we retesting those areas as well. So that's that test exit criteria. So this is nothing but how you enter your testing, how you exit out of your testing. If you understand that, you're good to go. Ignore this number 4 test levels. This is something extra I added for this particular release, but that's not important, or it's not very it's not standard, so I moved on from that. Test deliverables. So what are test deliverables? So test deliverables, during your testing, you as a tester, you'll be able to provide multiple type of documentations. Those are nothing but test deliverables. For example, right, test plan. We're talking about test plan. This is what we are doing right now. So test deliverable could be 1, 2, 3, or 4. It doesn't have to all of them, right? This is talking about test plan, requirements, functional spec, design document. Ignore all of that. We as a tester, we are focused on test plan, which is this one right here. We're focused on test cases. We are focused on reports, nothing more than that. RTM also, requirement traceability metrics. We will get there, we'll talk about it right now. As a test deliverable, just understand during your testing, whatever the documentation you can provide to your team or the broader team, it's nothing but test deliverables. And as part of your standard test deliverables, you have test plan, test cases, and test report. That's it. Deliverables metrics, ignore this. Sorry guys, I know we're getting late, but I'll try to wrap it up. Documentations. So requirement traceability metrics, I will not talk about it right now. We have a section dedicated for that. So reports, you could create multiple reports, mostly depending on the tools you're using. You could create those reports from the tool. When we do our project here in IT Solutions, we'll be using Jira, and we'll be fetching report from the Jira itself and provide it to the team, or we can do Excel, depends. Well, let's talk a little bit about the report. So report is nothing but you're talking about current status of the project. You're talking about a number of defects you found, type of defects, right? Each defect has its own priority and the type. So it could be high priority, low priority, medium priority, or a blocker. A blocker is a showstopper. This type of information should go into the report. You talk about how many bugs has been logged, how many has been closed, how many are open, how many are in progress, things like that. You talk about number of test cases, number of test cases created versus and number of test cases executed, number of open bugs, open test cases. You talk about overall status of the project or the release, if that release is in risk or not, things like that. Any highlights, that's what goes into your report. So there are daily report, weekly report, overall reports, things like that. So depending on your manager or the company or the project ask, you can create the report they're looking for. Usually now it's, reports and everything is available within that tool, within the project. So usually no one bothers you about that, but Yeah, there was time that I remember I had to create the reports and send it daily and weekly, physically email them, things like that. But now it's very, very simple with the tools that we're using. Tools and bug reporting, tools and bug reporting. So this is talking about different type of tools that we will be using for our testing. Obviously, Jira is one. Jira is test management tool, defect tracking tools. We will be using it. Selenium is another one, is for automation testing. And then we have Postman is for API testing. JMeter is for performance testing. We talked about it a little bit. And Jira X-Ray is for test management. And so we'll be using in our project Jira X-Ray, Jira, and Postman. Postman we'll be using later. And obviously, if someone wants to learn automation, we'll be using Selenium. All right, test strategy. I will ignore it. This is something may take a long time, but this is not standard, right? This is created for this particular project. So I'll move on from this. Bug reporting. This is very, 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 very important. So just because you find a bug and log a bug, it's not everything. You need to make sure that you are logging the bug proper way and you're giving enough information. You're following proper rules before you log bugs. I have seen people logging bugs, doesn't make sense. I have seen people logging bugs, very, very confusing, and that's not acceptable now. When it comes to logging bug, you need to make sure that your bug is clear enough for everybody to understand. Your bug should tell the entire story. No one needs to reach out to you to find out what you have logged. And that is a very bad practice. And that happens a lot in the industry. And we need to avoid that. As a QA, you need to know how to log a proper bug. And this is a template for bug logging. So usually there are some auto-generated fields. So bug ID and all of that, issue type, date, this will be auto-generated. When it comes to title or summary, this is where you need to spend a lot of time. You need to have proper summary written, and we will be working on it, and we'll make sure that everyone is very, very good at it. So your summary should tell the entire story. Your summary should tell what broke and where it broke. This information must be there in your summary. And then your descriptions, and in your description, you'll be writing proper description about the bug, and then you'll have your steps. In your steps, you'll be writing reproducible steps. In your steps, you'll be letting them know how and where to go to see that bug. And you'll be giving them step by step, 1, 2, 3, 1, log in, 2, navigate, and 3, to click or perform action, and 4 will be verify that broken piece. All right. Obviously, you'll be providing screenshots of that broken piece, whatever that functionality is. Then you'll be providing browser details, which browser you found that issue. Then you'll be giving your expected result and actual results. So expected, the defect is nothing but the difference between expected and actual results. So you'll be showing them that this is expected, but this is actual, and that actual is what's broken. Assigned to, this could be auto generated field, or if it's not, you can assign it to appropriate person, whether if it's a developer or a manager. Priority, when you're creating a bug, you need to know what is the priority, and priority is something defined by QA, but some cases it could be adjusted later on within the meetings. So priority, when you find a bug, right, if that bug is critical, then you'll be giving the priority of that as high, or a blocker. A blocker would be, let's see, So there are different type of priority, right? Like I talked about high, medium, low, or the blocker. So let's say if this application doesn't even load, then it's a blocker. Let's say if the login functionality is not working, that's a blocker. Let's say a blocker is a showstopper. You cannot move forward. So let's say you're supposed to go to flight page, and that page is entirely broken. So that is a blocker. So for example, here, they're saying under construction, but if your developer says, hey, this vacation page is ready, go ahead and test it. And now you come here and you don't see anything here. So you'll be logging this as a blocker. And when you raise a blocker ticket, they need to go fix it immediately. Next hour, same day type of thing, right? So if it's not a same day type of fix, that would be a critical bug, not a blocker. A blocker has to be fixed same day. Usually it cannot wait next day, but some cases it can, but I'm just explaining to you difference between blocker and critical. Blocker has to be fixed ASAP. Critical can wait a day or two. All right. So that's priority. Severity is disappearing, but you can also, depending on the template that you have. So okay, let me show you. So if I go to my project, senior, okay, so this, I can create a bug here, right? So we have the summary, we have, what else we have? We have descriptions, we have environment, we have team, then we have acceptance criteria. So we have priority here. So, my company has a blocker, critical, major, minor. Now we don't worry about severity. Severity is here, but it's not a mandatory field. We don't worry about severity. So it could be severity, could be critical. Severity 1, 2, 3. 1 is blocker, 2 is critical, 3 is major. So depending on the priority, you can define the severity as well. So severity is how bad, how critical this bug is. So this is something like on top of the priority, you're adding severity. So if something is really bad, you're giving a high and blocker priority, and you're also adding more pressure to that, saying, hey, this is a high priority, high severity bug. We got to go fix it right now. So that's what is high priority and high severity. There could be cases, right? A bug could be high priority but low severity, and vice versa. There could be a situation where a bug is medium or low priority but high severity. And I could give an example. And I remember someone asked me in an interview, give me an example of high priority, high severity bug. And that's easy to do. And then they asked me, give me an example of low priority but high severity bug. So obviously, high priority, high severity is very simple. So let's say login functionality is not working or application is not loading. That's high priority, high severity, right? But let's say an example of high priority, low priority, and high severity. And what I told them, like, okay, so let's say I have an application here and I have a UI and landing page, and I'm here in my landing page and I see my logo is messed up. That's a low priority, but high severity. It's low priority because it's not functionally breaking anything. It's a logo that is designed one way, but they have done something different. So that's a low priority, but high severity. High severity because it's on my landing page and everybody has access to it. And this is the first thing everybody looks into it. So although it's not breaking any functionality, but it is impacting the overlook of my application in the company. So that's a high severity, but low priority. Also, if something is misspelled here, right? functionally is working, but it looks bad. So that should be low priority because functionality is working, but when it comes to severity, it's a high severity. So these are the different examples I have given. So you can find your example. All right, moving on. Levels, we will talk about it later. Let's not worry about it. All right, let's move on. It's getting late. Okay. So then in your test plan, you talk about bug life cycle, and let's not spend time here. We will have a session for that. And I just talked about priority and severities already, so you guys know that. Test environment. So I talked about test environment before today, so I hope it's clear to you guys. So just understand standard. We have 4 different environments in a standard company. You have dev environment, you have QA environment, you have UAT environment, and you have production environment. And what I mean by that, let me just give you an example so it might be a little bit clear to you guys. Work in progress. QA tickets, work in progress. Okay. Environments, okay. Can you guys see my screen with the environments?
Yes.
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 Perfect, thank you. So we look, this is actual project. We have dev environment, QA, pre-prod, prod. Now, if you look at this, so this application, right? We are, so dev working on this environment. We as a QA working on this environment, and pre-prod is where. This is a perfect example, guys. And if you don't learn about environment now, you'll never learn. So pre-prod, when that application moves to pre-prod, we'll have this, and then production is here. So I'm going to open all 4 environments, so it's going to be very clear to you guys. If all 4 environments. All right, so this is our application. It's almost, okay. So look at the dev environment, guys. So this is the dev environment. Developers are working in this environment. So we have a device manager page, and in this device manager page, in dev environment, so look, this URL, it says dev. So in this dev environment, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 chillers. And if you click on any one of them, it will take you to the chiller detail page. So that's in dev environment. While it's loading, I'm gonna, all right. So chiller 141, more information will load in a minute, hopefully in seconds. So this is dev environment. Now moving on to QA environment, we'll come back to it in a second. So this is QA environment. Do you guys see any differences? Same application, this is QA environment. What difference do you see? So we were in device manager page, right? And in this device manager page, dev environment had 6 chillers, 6 of these hyperlinks, right? Here we have 4. Why do you think it is? This has 4, same application. This has 4. This has 6. Let's go back to, okay. This has 6. Why do you think this is?
The missing ones are irrelevant to the situation.
Not exactly. Look at this. So this is UAT, pre-prod is UAT. So this also has 4. And this is production. And production does not have anything. Why do you think that is? So the code travels from one environment to another environment. So this is development environment. That's where everything happens. This is where an application gets built. And from here, when that is completed, so this has more information, right? And if I go into click on some of this, it will take me to another page, and that will have even more information. So usually dev is where an application gets built. And once that is done, and they will do their internal testing, then they will push this code to QA environment, this environment. And from here, we as a QA will do our job, and we'll say, okay, we are done with this. We'll push this code to the next environment, which is pre-prod. And every environment is gated, right? Every environment has gates. So once that is done from this pre-prod, it will travel to production. So production still doesn't have anything. So look at this here. In this environment, we have a lot of information. So this latest version of the code, latest version of the release hasn't get pushed to QA yet, but it did get pushed some. So we're working agile, right? Some of the functionality is already pushed to QA. So this previous build was pushed to QA with this information, and we have it. We have tested it, and we pushed it to UAT. That's it. And this is where it's sitting. It didn't move to production yet. Look, production does not have anything. It looks like a joke, right? You know, device manager doesn't have anything, but pre-prod has decent amount of data, which was tested from this environment, and we pushed it to pre-prod. But when it comes to this developers environment, they have done more work, but this work is still internal to them, sitting there. And once they're done, they will push it to us, and we'll have those further information. I hope this different environment concept is clear. So when the code is pushed to this environment, this is where everybody will have access to it. This is external, so everybody will have access to it. All right. So as a QA, like, you know, obviously this is where we'll be working, and this is our environment. That's where we'll be sitting. So either this application is, we should have more information, like the graphs and everything should be loading, but it seems like it's okay. Last 6 hours, nothing happened. 24 hours, anything happened? Yeah, some information is there. Last week, what is it? Anyway, so this is part of the environment that I was talking about. Hopefully that concept is clear. What else? So risk assumption and dependencies. This is something needs to be highlighted prior to testing. So you need to talk about it before, and you need to circulate this before you start your testing. In most cases, what I see, different type of risk are, this is one thing when we're working in agile, late delivery of the application. What it means is, so you have like requirement or Jira ticket or stories or epics, whatever you're working on. So first dev works on it, and they spend quite a bit of time, couple of days and whatnot, and then they'll fix it and send it to QA. Now you have 2 weeks, right? If you're working in Agile, you have 2 weeks. Now, if they take within this 2 weeks, everything has to be developed, tested, and sign off. Now, in these 2 weeks, if the developers takes 1.5 weeks to do everything, and then they give you only half week to work on, that's not good enough, right? You'll be delaying that project, and you'll be having issues completing your task. So you need to find, and this is a challenge, it always happens, you need to find a way to work with your dev team, letting them know, hey, if we have 10 tickets, fix something, build something that don't take too much time, build something, send it to me, I will go test it while you're building the next requirement, next story, and whatnot. I personally face this issue multiple times, and everybody does. I know when you work in Agile, what you'll see, like they're working because they start work, they work first, but that doesn't mean we're sitting idle. We're doing test planning, we're doing other things, but actual testing doesn't happen unless until you have that functionality built to you. Now, some cases they take a lot of time. Some cases they're able to prioritize the proper tasks so they can finish it in the same day or next day or in 2 days and push it to you. So you need to find a way to highlight that. You need to find a way to talk about it. And if you're facing this issue repeatedly, bring it up to the team, broader team. So as a team, everybody's aware of it, and everybody as a team can find a solution. And this is nothing against anybody, like, you know, it takes time for them to complete a job. It takes time for you to test that job, and both parties needs to make sure this is being done properly, right? Cool. So that's why we have the retro meeting every sprint. In that retro meeting, we talk about what went well, what didn't. Anyone have any questions? All right, guys, if you don't have any questions, I would ask you to mute your microphone so you're not disturbing others. Okay. So that's a risk. We need to talk about it. We need to highlight it. Another huge risk is requirement changes, frequent requirement changes. So in most cases, we see like in last minute, them make changes to the requirement, and it's very common in Agile world. So let's say you are in, you know, you have a requirement given to you, and you start working on it. You've done some sort of test, pre-work and everything, and now in the last minute they change this requirement. So that's a challenge, and that needs to be addressed, and that needs to be talked about. There is a standard in place where you freeze the requirement, even in Agile, even though Agile is created to have client the ability to change the requirement and whatnot. But at some point, you got to draw the line, and you have to freeze the requirement and say, this is it, you don't touch it anymore. Even if you're a client, come back in 2 weeks and let's talk. So that type of standard needs to be followed in your team. That way, you know, it is, you know, workable, and it doesn't delay the project. And lastly, having a separate and isolated QA environment makes the huge difference. Some companies, they don't want to spend the extra dollar to give you the isolated environment, but that's rare. Usually everybody is willing to do that because dev and QA cannot and should not work in the same environment. You could work in a UAT. If you don't have a QA environment, you could work in UAT. That's more suitable, but that should not be the case. QA should have their own environment, and having that environment makes a huge difference. So that's that. What else? These are acronyms. You can list out, or you can ignore. No issues on that. I think this is it, if I'm not mistaken. All right. I know this was a long session. Apologies, but it's needed. And this document, if you guys have access to it, this talks about how and what in the test plan. And if you scroll down, it talks more about test plan in details here. Give me 1 second. Yeah, test plan here. What is test plan? And different phases, and we are explaining each phases, cover page, what's in the cover page, table of contents, introduction, test purpose, test scope, test schedule, test approach, test entry, and test exit criteria, acceptance criteria, risk, deliverables, testing tools, test environment, roles and responsibility, acronyms. So I believe everyone has access to this document. If not, reach out, I'll reshare. But this has everything that you need to know about test plan. Any questions, guys? Seems like everyone is good. You still have time. Any questions? Anyone? Okay. So, two more guys. We have to create test plan. There's no other alternative. You need to be very, very comfortable with test plan. So I will give you this template. This is not a good template. Okay, let me find a better template. Or you can always reach out to your leads. They have a lot of templates. We have worked on lots of templates. So they should have those templates. I will give you I'll give you homework. I'll give you test plan template. Can you guys please create a test plan for this project, Guru 99 demo site project? Just use the template. I'm not asking you to write a test plan from scratch. You have a template in your hand. Use the same template. Make it personal. Personalize it. Change information that needs to be changed and make it toward this particular project, and change your information, make it yours, and then submit it in Google Classroom. Your lead should review it. If you have any questions, please reach out, and throughout the week we'll have multiple group studies. In that group studies, you can ask questions, or you can ask questions in Microsoft Teams, whichever works for you. Questions before we end? All right, just make sure you're in Microsoft Teams, guys. If you're not in Microsoft Teams, you're missing out on informations. We are doing a lot of good things there. We have daily, almost daily group studies